Dust Hollow, New Mexico Territory, 1887. The kind of year when drought cracked the earth, and men cracked faster. Ezekiel Zeke Carter stepped into the hard noon light, one hand steady on the reins of his mule, the other lifting a fallen fence post back into place. Sweat rolled along his jaw, dust clung to his coat, but he worked with the slow, stubborn strength of a man who refused to break twice. Across the road, Clara Dawson stumbled from Hank Bowers's porch, his drunk hand clamped around her wrist like a hunting trap. She tried to pull free. Hank only tightened his grip. Zeke paused mid-motion, eyes narrowing, boots turning toward the trouble he hadn't planned to step into today. The saloon doors creaked. Folks watched. Hank shouted her debt. Zeke kept walking. No one in Dust Hollow knew the truth. This wasn't the first time Zeke had stepped into another man's fire. Before we continue, if you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. The yard behind Hank Bower's place was nothing but hard-packed dirt, littered with bottles and cracked chairs, the sour smell of old whiskey clinging to every board and shadow. Evening light hadn't settled. It just hung there, thin and unsure. The way Clara Dawson looked, caught between hunger and shame, her arm locked in Hank's swollen grip, while a half-circle of men watched from the porch like they were studying a stray mule. Hank was drunk past reason, though he'd swear he still had his wits. His breath came thick as swamp heat, brushing Clara's cheek as he leaned in, calling her debt instead of her name. "Girl like you don't walk out on what's owed," he muttered, tightening until her bones pressed together. Clara bit her lip so she wouldn't whimper. A sound like that on Bower's property was permission. Permission for him to drag her wherever he pleased. The porchmen laughed. A crate rattled. Someone spat into the dust. Clara had grown used to that look these past months. The eyes that said her life wasn't hers. Just something attached to a signature her father scratched on a drunk night long before he died. Her breath trembled out of her chest, thin as thread. She hadn't eaten since yesterday. Her legs shook like water, trying to hold the shape of bone. The world swayed. She feared she'd collapse and be dragged like a sack of grain for the men to cheer at. Then, a shadow stepped into the yard. Not loud, not fast, just solid. Quiet the way storms are quiet before they break. Ezekiel Carter stopped a few paces away, boots dusted from travel, hat low, coat hanging heavy off shoulders that had worked since dawn. He didn't touch Hank, didn't touch Clara. He simply stood where a decent man was meant to stand, between harm and the one being harmed. Clara felt it first, the air shifting around him, steadier, colder, but safer somehow. Relief stung her chest, sharp as hunger. "Evenin', Hank," Zeke said, voice deep, not raised. Folks said he talked like a barn door hinge, slow, worn, but not easily pushed. Hank squinted. "Boy, ain't your business what I do with what's mine." Zeke's jaw twitched once. Men whispered he had a temper buried deep, but none had seen it burn. Rumors said he'd carried the bodies of his wife and baby boy from a smoldering barn with his own hands, Soot streaked across his face like war paint, and he hadn't raised his voice much since. He looked at Clara now, not at the bruises, not at the torn sleeve, just at her, like a person. "You all right, ma'am?" Those 3 words hit harder than Hank's grip. No man had asked her that in years. Laughter exploded from the porch. "That rancher think he's some hero? He already lost one family. Ain't he learned to mind his place?" The words landed hard, but Zeke didn't flinch. His stillness felt like a warning carved from stone. Sheriff Cal Pike lingered near the fence, hat low, eyes lower. He glanced at Clara's wrist and looked away. "Everything all right over here, Hank?" Not Clara, not even a look for her. Something inside her folded. Zeke exhaled through his nose, slow. "I ain't taking nobody anywhere they don't choose to go," he said. "Choice matters, even out here." Hank barked a laugh, yanking Clara closer. "She ain't got choice," he spat. "Her daddy saw to that. Signed her over for a warm winter. Ain't that right, girl?" Her father's tired face flickered in her mind. The shame in his voice, the promise he couldn't keep, and the debt that survived him. Zeke spoke again, quieter. "You can stay, or you can go with me, but you choose." Hank snarled. "She's mine." "No," Zeke said. "She ain't." Silence fell. Even the porch men froze. Something in Zeke's tone cut deeper than shouting ever could. Clara breathed once, a shaky breath, the kind taken before stepping off a ledge. For the first time in months, her feet felt like they belonged to her. She didn't ask permission, didn't apologize. She simply moved. Small, trembling steps circling behind Zeke's broad frame, away from Hank's reach. It hurt. Everything hurt. But she kept walking until she smelled dust and horse and smoke on Zeke's coat. Simple things that somehow meant safety. Zeke shifted half an inch, enough to put himself entirely between her and danger. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. In that thin slice of evening, dust settling like falling ash, Clara Dawson realized she wasn't saved. Not yet. But for the first time, saving herself didn't feel impossible. It simply felt like the next step. Behind Ezekiel Carter, and away from the man who called her debt. Clara didn't remember taking that last step away from Hank. Only the looseness in her knees afterward, like the strength had drained out the soles of her boots and left her hollow. The men on the porch stared at her as if she'd broken a rule older than the town itself. Maybe she had. Women like her weren't meant to walk away from men like Hank Bowers. Not in Dust Hollow. Not in New Mexico territory. Not ever. Zeke didn't touch her. Didn't guide her. Didn't even speak as he angled toward his wagon waiting by the split-rail fence. He moved slow enough for her to follow, fast enough that Hank couldn't catch up without making an enemy of the sheriff. Behind them, Hank's rage cracked open. "You hear me, girl? You come back. You're owed. Your daddy promised." A bottle shattered. Clara flinched so hard her breath broke in her chest. Zeke stopped, not turning, just stopped. like a wall settling in place between a house and a coming storm. "Time to leave," he said, voice low enough for Hank to ignore, but steel enough he probably wouldn't. Clara climbed onto the wagon seat, fingers trembling against the warm, worn wood. Warm felt strange. Warm felt like something she didn't deserve. Zeke untied the reins with quiet, practiced hands. "You all right to sit?" he asked. She nodded, though she wasn't sure she was all right to do much of anything. Hunger twisted deep in her belly, and her bruised wrist throbbed with each heartbeat. The wagon creaked into motion. Dust curled around their boots. Behind them, Hank's shouts rose and fell until the road bent and swallowed him in the dying light. Only then did Zeke reach into the side crate and pull out a small cloth bundle. He opened it and handed her a piece of cornbread rough as river stone. "Eat slow," he said. "Been a while, I reckon." Clara tried. She truly did. But the first bite hit her stomach like mercy, and the second like fire. She devoured it, cupping her hand to catch the crumbs. Shame flushed hot across her neck. "Thank you," she whispered. Zeke nodded, as though she'd spoken a full speech. They rode in silence. Not peaceful silence. Just the kind born from two people who didn't know which truths were safe to set down between them. The sky bruised into twilight. Coyotes called along the ridge. Clara's breathing steadied, though each bump of the wagon made her ribs scream. Black Rock Ranch rose ahead, a dark shape etched against the land. A long cabin with a slanted roof, a corral missing 3 slats, a barn standing half stubborn, half tired. Smoke whispered from the chimney. The place looked worn, but not broken. Like a man who'd lived through worse than most folks ever would. Zeke pulled beside the porch. "Go on inside," he said quietly. "Ruby'll be around." "Ruby?" Clara echoed. "My niece." He stepped down, offered her no hand, whether respect or distance she couldn't tell, and began unloading the feed bags. Clara slid off the wagon. Her legs nearly buckled. She caught herself on the porch rail. The front door cracked open. A small girl peered out, 9 or 10, with wary brown eyes and a cloth doll missing half an arm. "You the lady Uncle Zeke brought?" she asked, voice small but steady. "I suppose I am," Clara said. Ruby studied her like a stray dog deciding whether to bite or follow. Then she stepped aside. Clara entered. The living room was simple. Table, chairs, a low humming stove, walls smelling faintly of horses and old smoke. Not harsh smoke, old smoke, the kind that stayed in wood after fire tried to claim it, but failed. "Sit there," Ruby said, pointing to a sturdy chair. "Uncle Zeke says folks who's hurt ought to sit before they fall." No accusation, no pity, just fact. Plain as dust. Clara sat. The chair creaked beneath her weight. Terror still lodged behind her ribs, tight as a knot she couldn't pull loose. Zeke entered, hanging his hat by the door. "2 things you ought to know about this place," he said. "Nobody here gets hit, and nobody here gets kept." Clara stared. "Kept?" You can leave whenever you choose. Stay too. But the choice is yours. Choice. That word again. Gentle and sharp at once, like a blade wrapped in cloth. Clara looked at her hands, bruised, scraped. Looked at Ruby watching her like a wild creature waiting for a sign. Looked at Zeke, steady as a post set deep in the ground. She didn't trust her voice. Didn't trust the warmth rising in her chest. Didn't trust the hope clawing its way toward the surface. But she managed one nod. Small. Careful. Real. Zeke didn't smile. Didn't soften. But something in his shoulders eased. Just a fraction. Outside, the last light slipped behind the ridge. Inside, Clara breathed. Not safe. Not yet. But freer than she'd been in months. And freedom, thin, fragile, trembling, was enough to keep her upright. The first night at Black Rock came down cold. The kind of cold that crept slow and deliberate along the floorboards until it found the bones of anyone sitting still long enough. Clara Dawson felt it pooling around her ankles as she sat on the small cot near the door, the place she chose without being asked, close enough to escape if things went wrong, far enough not to claim space that wasn't hers. The room was dim, lit only by a lantern hung from an old nail. The flame wavered each time the wind brushed the cabin, making shadows breathe along the walls. Her ribs ached with every breath. Hunger still gnawed. Exhaustion shimmered under her skin. She thought she might sleep the moment she touched the mattress. But sleep didn't come. It wasn't the cabin. Wasn't Ruby's soft breaths drifting from the small room down the hall. Wasn't even the fear clinging like a thin film across her lungs. It was the sound. Thunk. Metal on wood. Measured. Heavy. Unhurried. Clara blinked at the ceiling, listening. Another strike followed. Clean. Rhythmic. The kind of sound a person made when working through something that didn't fit in words. She rose slowly, every muscle dragging. The floor bit cold against her bare feet as she crossed to the window and pulled back the curtain just enough to see outside. There he was. Ezekiel Carter stood beneath the pale moon, coat off, sleeves rolled, muscles carved in the lantern glow he'd hung from a post. He was repairing the ranch gate, the one leaning crooked when they arrived, each nail driven with a force held just short of fury. His face was still, too still. She watched him raise the hammer again. His breath left him hard through his nose, misting the cold air. The hammer came down. Thunk. Another nail set. Another thought beaten quiet. Clara's chest tightened. Maybe it was the way he moved, steady but not calm, like a man walking across a bridge that had burned once before. The old gate bore scorch marks along the lower rail, blackened streaks, twisted wood. Memory burned into the grain. Zeke touched those scars now, his thumb brushing the char as if trying to feel the past still trapped inside it. His shoulders tensed. His jaw flexed once. Then, another strike. Level moderate. Thunk. Steel sang against wood. A small hand tugged Clara's sleeve. She turned to find Ruby beside her, blanket around her shoulders, hair mussed from sleep. You heard it too? Ruby whispered. Clara nodded. He don't like nights, Ruby said softly. Especially cold ones. Says they make him think too loud. Clara swallowed. Is that why he's out there? Ruby shrugged, solemn and small. He fixes things when he can't fix what's hurtin' inside. The words were too wise for a child her size. Clara looked down, big brown eyes watching the yard like they expected ghosts to come walking. You should be asleep, Clara murmured. Ruby's voice dropped. Uncle Zeke don't sleep much. Hasn't since the fire. The fire. The one folks whispered about. When his barn burned. When he lost his wife and baby inside. When he sat in a jail cell for a killing people said he didn't do but believed anyway, because believing made the world simpler. Clara looked back through the curtain. Zeke had paused again. His hand hovered over the charred wood like touching it might set the world ablaze a second time. His eyes were fixed on the ground. Dark, unfocused, old with a grief that never fully left. He lifted his head. For a moment, the lantern light caught his face and Clara saw something flicker. Raw, unguarded. A man remembering a night he would spend the rest of his life trying not to relive. Zeke reached for another plank, hammered it in. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Not angry, not violent, just desperate. A man trying to build something steady in a world that had taken too much from him. Ruby whispered, sometimes he works till morning. Sometimes he stops when he remembers he ain't alone here no more. Clara felt heat rise behind her eyes. She blinked hard. Tears were dangerous. Tears made a person soft, and soft made a person easy to break. What am I supposed to do? Clara whispered before she could stop herself. Ruby looked up, tiny shoulders lifting. Just be here, she said. That's more'n most folks ever gave him. Outside, Zeke hammered another nail, his shoulders rising and falling with the weight of each breath. Clara let the curtain fall, the lantern flickered behind her, washing the room in a tired glow. She sat back on the cot, pulling the thin blanket over her legs. The cold wasn't quite so sharp now. Outside, Zeke hammered the night apart, a little at a time. Inside, Clara lay awake, listening to the sound of a man fighting his ghosts in the only way he knew how. And for reasons she couldn't name, not yet. The rhythm of that hammer made her feel less alone than she had in years. Morning at Black Rock came gray and thin, the kind of morning that didn't bother with warmth. Clara Dawson stepped off the porch, slow, careful on her sore ribs, clutching the edges of Zeke's spare coat around her shoulders. The coat was heavy, too big for her frame, but it was the first thing in months that didn't feel like a cage. Zeke was already hitching the wagon. He spoke without looking up. Got errands in town? You can stay. Ruby understands. Clara hesitated. The house behind her felt safe, but too quiet, too full of the sound of her own thoughts. Silence frightened her more than noise ever had. I'd rather ride along, she murmured. Zeke studied her for a heartbeat. just long enough to see she wasn't forcing herself out of fear, then nodded. All right. Ruby came out rubbing her eyes, boots too big, clutching her one-armed cloth doll like a sentinel. You bring her back, Uncle Zeke, she whispered. Town folks talk mean. Zeke touched Ruby's head lightly. Talk don't kill nobody, not unless folks let it. Clara wasn't sure that was true, not for a black man in Dust Hollow, and not for a woman with bruises she couldn't hide. But she climbed aboard anyway. The wagon rattled down the dirt road. Clara watched the land roll by. Dry grass bending in the breeze. Fence posts leaning like old men. The sky stretched too wide for her small, tired bones. Every bump stabbed pain through her ribs. She kept her breath shallow, hoping Zeke wouldn't notice. Dust Hollow greeted them with its usual smell of stale smoke and horses. Folks paused as they rode in. Men squinted. Women clutched their shawls tighter. Clara lowered her eyes. Shame wasn't new, but it still scraped raw along her ribs. Zeke dismounted outside Harlan's general store. Won't be long, he said. Clara followed. Staying alone would have been worse. Inside, the store was dim, crowded with crates and flour sacks. Harlan looked up. Thick man, thin temper. His gaze flicked from Clara to Zeke, back to Clara. Something sharp moved across his face. You bringin' trouble in here, Carter? He said. Zeke kept his voice level. Just need supplies. Harlan muttered about ranchers who don't know their place, but fetched the feed anyway. Clara drifted to a shelf, pretending to study thread. Tiem for 50s. Two women whispered behind her. That's the Dawson girl. Heard she ran off with him. No wonder Hank's fit to burst. Clara's stomach twisted tight. Her breathing scraped like sand. Outside the window, across the street, Hank Bowers sat slumped at a saloon table with 3 men. Papers lay scattered before them. Yellowed sheets, folded deeds, ink pots. The men leaned close, voices low. Zeke followed her gaze, eyes narrowing just a fraction. He shifted to block her view, but it was too late. Clara already felt the prickle at the back of her neck. When they stepped outside, Sheriff Cal Pike stood near the horse trough, leaning on a post like a man wishing himself invisible. Carter, he said quietly, you ought to know. Hank's been complainin' you took what's his. Says he's got papers to prove it. Says the Zeke cut in, voice calm. Say it plain, Sheriff. Pike swallowed. Says the county judge might be persuaded to look at land ownership and whether a man like you's fit to keep it. The air punched out of Clara's lungs. Her grip on the wagon rail tightened until her knuckles turned white. Zeke didn't flinch, didn't curse, didn't raise his voice. He simply stared until the sheriff shifted on his feet. I ain't broken any laws, Zeke said. Pike lowered his eyes. Sometimes it don't matter. The words settled like dust, quiet, choking, everywhere. Clara had heard men talk like that before, when her father signed that damned contract with Hank. Just for the winter. She knew the sound a man made when he was trying to excuse the wrong he'd allow. Zeke loaded the feed bags, movement steady but tense, lifting each sack with just a shade too much control, like he was holding his anger down with both hands. Something tightened in Clara's chest. A hot, sick fear that had nothing to do with Hank. If I leave the ranch, she whispered, would they leave you be? Zeke froze mid-lift. Slowly, he set the bag down and turned. His eyes weren't angry, just tired, deep-carved tired. You runnin' won't change men like that, he said. Only thing it'll change is you. Clara looked down, ashamed she'd even asked. They climbed onto the wagon. Zeke flicked the reins, guiding the horse toward the edge of town. Behind them, whispers rose again, sour, clinging, full of the judgment Dust Hollow lived on. Clara kept her back straight, though her body wanted to fold. Every jolt stabbed through her ribs. She didn't complain. She stared at her lap, breath trembling. She'd thought leaving Hank's yard was the hard part. She'd thought stepping behind Zeke would save her. But as Dust Hollow fell behind them, Clara Dawson realized something colder. Safety wasn't a place. It was a fight. And she'd brought that fight straight to the only man who'd ever stood between her and harm. The wind shifted that afternoon, carrying the scent of old dust and horses, warning enough for anyone who'd lived long in New Mexico territory. Zeke Carter stepped off the porch, wiping sweat from his brow after fixing a busted fence line. He didn't hear the riders until they were nearly at the gate. 3 horses, 2 strangers, and Hank Bowers, red-eyed from whiskey, jaw set like stone. Clara Dawson froze in the doorway, fingers gripping the frame as if it were the only thing holding her upright. Ruby moved behind her, half hidden in the shadows, clutching her one-armed doll tight to her chest. Hank dismounted badly, boots slipping in the dirt. He jerked himself upright and grinned at Zeke, a grin sharp as a rusted nail. "Carter," he slurred, "got something belongs to me." Zeke didn't move, didn't blink. He simply shifted a fraction, placing Clara fully behind him. The man beside Hank, thin, stiff coat, ink stains on his sleeves, stepped forward, smelling of old paper and sour sweat. "I'm Mr. Patterly," he said, "licensed to witness and validate debt contracts for Lincoln County." He drew a folded document from his coat, edges yellowed, creased from long use. "Mr. Bowers has filed a complaint regarding a delinquent labor bond. Claims Miss Clara Dawson is unlawfully absent from her contracted obligations." Clara's stomach dropped. Her knees went weak. She dug her nails into the wood until splinters pricked her skin. Zeke's voice came slow, quiet. "You'll speak plain for her." Patterly opened the paper with reverence, as if holding gospel. Her late father, Samuel Dawson, accepted winter aid from Mr. Bowers. In exchange, Miss Dawson was bound to labor at his property until the debt was paid in full. Bound. The words slid down Clara's spine like ice. Hank stepped closer, waving a small, tarnished key, same size and shape as the one Clara wore on the leather string beneath her dress. "This here's the key to her shed," Hank said. "The shed I fixed up for her. My property. My laborer." Something inside Clara gave way. a soft, sickening tear, like fabric splitting at the seams. Her fingers went to the key at her throat. It suddenly felt too tight, too heavy, like iron hands closing around her neck. "That contract ain't worth spit," Zeke said, voice sharp as a buried blade. "It don't give you—" "It gives him ownership," Patterly cut in, "until the debt's cleared." Clara flinched as if struck. Her father's trembling hands, the smell of whiskey, his whispered promise. "Just for a little while, Clara." But winter passed, and he didn't. Hank's grin turned uglier. "She belongs with me. Contract says so. And if she don't come back, your friend Carter here's guilty of harboring contracted white labor. You know what they do to his kind for that." Clara couldn't breathe. Zeke's jaw tightened, but he still didn't look away. Patterly folded the paper neatly. "If Miss Dawson returns voluntarily, no action is needed. If she refuses—" His gaze slid toward Zeke, cold calculation. "Well, the county judge will decide." Ruby gasped, small, sharp, wounded. Clara steadied her with a trembling hand. Zeke stood silent for a long moment, long enough the strangers shifted uneasily. Hank scowled. Finally, Zeke spoke. "Paper don't make a person a thing." Hank barked a laugh. "Law does." "No," Zeke said. "Men do." The words dropped heavy into the dust. Clara felt them down to her bones. Patterly straightened. "Miss Dawson must state her intention." Hank leaned close, breath sour, eyes wild. "Say you're coming home, girl. Don't make this worse." Clara's vision blurred. Her chest tightened, key string cutting into her throat. Home. He called it home. Her hands shook so hard she had to grip her dress to keep from falling. Then Zeke shifted his stance, just enough that his shadow fell across Clara's shoulder. Not protection. A reminder. Choice matters. Even out here. Clara swallowed hard. Her voice trembled, but it held. "I'm not going back." Patterly blinked. Hank's grin soured. "You think that colored man's gonna keep you safe?" Hank snarled. "Think the law'll side with him?" Clara closed her fingers around her key, pressing until the metal teeth cut her palm. Pain steadied her, sharpened her. "I belong to no one." Patterly scribbled on his ledger. "Then Mr. Carter may be summoned to court. The accusation will stand." Zeke didn't flinch. "Write what you want. But she ain't property." Hank spat in the dirt. "You'll lose that ranch, Carter. Maybe that little niece of yours, too. County don't look kindly on men like you keepin' what ain't theirs." Zeke's eyes darkened. Not rage, not fear. Something older. A scar remembering the knife. Ruby pressed her face into Clara's side. Clara wrapped an arm around her despite the pain screaming through her ribs. Hank swung onto his horse. 3 days, he shouted. Then the judge hears it. Dust rose under their hooves as they rode away. Only when they vanished did Clara realize she was shaking uncontrollably. Zeke didn't step closer, didn't touch her. He simply said, voice worn thin, We'll figure it. Clara wanted to believe him. She wasn't sure she could, but she nodded, gripping the key so tight her palm bled. 3 days later, Dust Hollow held its breath. Word had spread fast. Hank Bowers dragging Clara Dawson to town to claim what's his. Ezekiel Carter trailing behind like a man walking into a verdict he didn't deserve. Folks loved a public reckoning, loved watching someone lose, loved knowing the law could be shaped like a noose when the right hands pulled the rope. Clara felt every eye long before she saw a single face. Hank's fingers clamped around her wrist, right over the dark bruise he'd left days before. Pain bloomed under his grip like fire pressing through her skin. "Walk straight, girl," Hank hissed. "Don't embarrass me." Embarrass him. As if her whole body wasn't trembling from the fear he'd carved into her. Zeke walked several paces behind, not close enough for folks to claim interference, not far enough to leave her alone. His hat brim shadowed his eyes, but Clara felt the tension rolling off him. A slow-burn fury born in men who'd learned the cost of stepping between violence and the one suffering it. Main Street swelled with people, men leaning against posts, women whispering behind gloved hands. Judgment mixed with pity, a blend Clara knew too well. Shame crawled hot up her throat, breathing hurt. Her father's voice slipped into her memory, hoarse, tired, begging forgiveness for signing her name away. "Just a winter, Clara. Just till we're warm." Winter ended. Warmth never did. Hank yanked her forward at the sheriff's office. "Sheriff," he roared, "I'm collectin' what's owed." Sheriff Cal Pike appeared in the doorway, face pale beneath his hat. He looked at Clara's torn sleeve, her shaking legs, the bruise on her cheek, and then looked away. Cowardice had a familiar shape. Pike wore it well. "Hank," he muttered, "Judge ain't here yet." "Don't need a judge to take back what's mine," Hank snapped. Clara's chest tightened. Panic pressed hot and suffocating against her ribs. Then, a voice behind her. Quiet. Firm. Steady. "You don't have to do this." Zeke. Not loud, but enough to reach her like a rope thrown to a drowning woman. Clara dragged air into her lungs. Shaky. Desperate. She opened her eyes and saw the crowd leaning forward, hungry for spectacle, hungry for degradation dressed as justice. Her shame sharpened. Slowly, painfully, she lifted her free hand and wrapped it around Hank's wrist, not to hold on, but to pull away. His grip tightened in surprise. "What the hell you think you're—" Clara jerked. Her skin tore under his fingers. Pain shot up her arm, vision blurring, but she didn't stop. With a desperate surge, she ripped her wrist free. The force spun her half a step back. She staggered, but stayed standing. A gasp rippled across the street. Hank stared at his empty hand, as if it had betrayed him. "You little—" Clara raised her arm high. Her wrist was raw, bruised, bleeding in small crimson beads. The key on its leather cord swung against her collarbone. Her voice trembled, but it carried. "I'm not going back." Whispers snapped through the crowd like dry grass catching flame. Hank lunged, but Zeke moved first. He didn't grab, didn't strike. He simply stepped between them, spine straight, stance wide, arms loose at his sides. A man who knew violence too well to underestimate it. Hank froze, rage twisting his face ugly. You think you can protect her? Law says she's mine till that debt's paid. Zeke didn't look at Hank. He kept his eyes on Clara. Say it again, he murmured. If you mean it. Clara's throat tightened. The world blurred. Fear clawed at her insides. Fear of Hank. Fear of the crowd. Fear of losing the only safety she'd found. Ruby's tiny voice echoed in her mind. You bring her back, Uncle Zeke. Clara inhaled, shaky, but exhaled steady. She faced the crowd. I'm not going back. Silence cracked open. A woman pressed a hand to her mouth. A couple men turned away, ashamed without knowing why. Sheriff Pike shifted, but still didn't move. Clara slowly lowered her wrist. It throbbed, but it was hers again. Hank's voice came strangled. You think this town's gonna let this stand? Think the judge'll side with a colored rancher over a white man with papers? Zeke finally turned to him. No threat in his face, just truth carved deep. Paper don't make a person a thing. Times 700 malums. Hank hissed. Law does. No, Zeke said softly. Men do. The words settled like a stone in the dry dust between them. Sheriff Pike cleared his throat weakly. Till the judge arrives, no one moves. That's the rule. Cowardly. Delayed justice. But enough to keep Hank from dragging her away. For now. Clara stepped back. Behind Zeke, but only by choice, not fear. Her wrist throbbed. Her ribs ached. Her breath still shook. But she'd said it. She'd stood in front of all Dust Hollow and said no. And nothing, no contract, no bruises, no man calling her debt, would ever make her unsay it. Black Rock went quiet in the days that followed. Not peaceful. Just quiet the way a coiled snake is quiet before it strikes. Zeke felt it first. He woke before dawn, breath already tight in his chest. The kind of tight that came from knowing trouble had a way of showing up slow, and then all at once. He fixed the north fence, then the south one. Checked the barn roof twice, though it hadn't rained in a week. Sweat clung to his neck. Dust clung to his boots. But none of it eased the pressure building behind his ribs. Ruby watched him from the porch, small fingers gripping the rail, trying to copy the steady way he breathed. Except his breathing wasn't steady today, or yesterday, or the day before. Clara felt the change too. She moved through the house softer than necessary. Quiet steps, quiet breaths, quiet hands folding linen that didn't need folding. The bruise on her wrist had darkened to a violent purple rimmed with red. Every lift of her arm sent a sting up to her elbow, sharp as barbed wire. But she didn't complain. Pain she understood. Pain made sense. Silence. That was harder. Every time Zeke walked past her without speaking, her stomach tightened. Not because she expected warmth, but because his silence felt like distance he didn't want to explain. She'd learned long ago how to read small things, how footsteps spoke louder than mouths, how a man looking away could warn a storm was coming. And Zeke's silence didn't feel like anger. It felt like fear he was carrying by himself. On the second night, she found him in the kitchen long after the lamps should have been out. He stood with his hands braced on the table, shoulders drawn tight, muscles trembling under his shirt like a tired horse trying not to collapse. "Zeke," she said softly. He didn't look up at first. When he finally did, the lamplight caught the exhaustion around his eyes. Deep lines carved by sleepless nights and the weight of words unsaid. "You need something?" His tone wasn't harsh, but there wasn't room for softness either. Clara swallowed, throat scraped raw from the words she'd been holding back. "You hardly look at me anymore." Zeke's jaw flexed. "It ain't that." "Then what?" Her voice wavered. "Is it because of what happened in town?" He exhaled slow through his nose. "Dust Hollow's watching this ranch closer than before. Every move I make feels like it's being tallied for use later. I gotta think careful." "I know," she whispered. "That's why I—" Her courage faltered. Her heart banged against her ribs. She pressed her bruised wrist to her stomach, as if that could steady her. "Zeke, I think it might be safer if I left." His head snapped up. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sharp, dangerous, like the air right before lightning splits open the sky. Clara stared at her hands. "If I go, Hank loses his reason to come after you. After the child. After this place. Sheriff can't call it harboring. Folks'll get bored of talking. Things will settle." Zeke stepped back from the table, as if her words had shoved him. "So you figure running solves it?" "I figure it saves you." Her voice cracked. She hated the sound of her own fear. Zeke shook his head. "Clara, you ain't listening. If you walk out of here because you choose something better, that's your right. But if you walk because you're scared of what men like Hank might do, then you're still letting them run your life." The truth hit like a slap. Clara's breath shuddered. "Maybe my life ain't worth the trouble it brings people." Zeke's face hardened, not with anger, but with the same something she'd seen on the street when he stepped between her and Hank. "Don't say that." His voice was low, almost pained. A small voice drifted from the hallway. Did I hear right? Clara's leavin'?" Ruby stood barefoot, knuckles white around her nightdress, eyes wide with a fear Clara recognized, the fear of being left behind. Clara's heart squeezed tight. I only meant—" Ruby rushed forward and grabbed Clara's skirt. "Don't go, please don't go. People always go. They leave Uncle Zeke and they leave me. Don't be like them." Something broke inside Clara. Not shattering, just a soft collapsing, like a tired wall giving up its weight. She knelt, ignoring the burn in her knees. "Ruby," she whispered, brushing the girl's hair. "I wasn't leaving because I wanted to. I don't want bad men hurting you because of me." To Ruby shook her head fiercely. "They'll hurt us anyway. They always try. But Uncle Zeke says we don't live by their rules." We live by ours. Clara's breath hitched. Zeke closed his eyes, and when he opened them, the tension hadn't left, but something steadied behind his gaze. Clara, he said quietly, if you stay, then stay because you want to stand with us, not behind us, not for us, with us. Her eyes burned. She wasn't used to choosing anything. She wasn't used to anyone asking her to. She looked at Ruby, small, trembling, hopeful, then at Zeke, tired, guarded, but waiting. Her voice came barely more than a breath. I'm still here. Ruby threw her arms around her waist. Clara closed her eyes and let the child hold on. Zeke turned away, pretending to check the stove, but Clara saw the unsteady rise of his shoulders. Outside, night pressed against the windows, but inside, a small warmth began to root itself. Not safety, not yet. Just the fragile, stubborn beginning of belonging. Trouble didn't come in daylight. Trouble liked shadows, liked the way fear traveled farther when carried by the dark. It was near midnight when Clara heard the first bottle smash against a fence post. The sound cracked through the quiet like bone splitting. She bolted upright on her cot, heart pounding, wrist screaming from the sudden movement. She pressed it to her chest, trying to catch her breath. Then came shouting, slurred, mean, rolling over the yard like sick thunder. Ruby stumbled from her bed, eyes wide. Uncle Zeke? Clara swept the girl into her arms. Ruby trembled, not from cold, but from memory. Children always remembered the shape of danger, even when they couldn't name it. Heavy boots pounded the porch. Zeke stepped out the door, lantern in hand, jaw tight enough to crack teeth. He didn't bother with a coat. Night air raised goose flesh on his arms. He didn't notice. Clara moved to the doorway, Ruby tucked behind her skirt. 7 men staggered into the yard. Some carried bottles. 2 carried rifles. Hank Bowers led them, shoulders swaying, eyes burning with drunken certainty. His mouth twisted when he saw Zeke in the lantern glow. There he is, Hank slurred. Big man thinks he can steal what's mine. Zeke didn't answer. He set the lantern on the porch rail and stepped forward, calm, deliberate, dangerous in the quietest way. Hank, he said, voice even, you don't want to do this tonight. A couple men snickered. Rifles lifted a fraction. Clara's lungs tightened. Ruby gripped her hand until pain sharpened Clara's breath. Hank raised his bottle, liquor sloshing. You remember fire, don't you, Carter? Remember how quick something catches once you throw a spark? Zeke's body stiffened, subtle, almost invisible, but Clara saw it. His breath hitched, just once, sharp, a wound reacting to its old name. The fire, the screams, the guilt he carried like shackles. Hank saw the reaction and grinned wider. Yeah, I remember that night real well. He didn't get to finish. Luke Porter, broad, ruin of a hat, too much whiskey in his veins, laughed loud, raising his bottle. Hell, we all remember, Luke hollered. Foreman lying in the chimot. Dirt! You... A man elbowed him hard. Luke shoved back. Nah, let me finish. Ain't every day you see a man shoot the boss and let another poor bastard take the fall. Hank here had perfect aim that night. The yard went still, deathly still. Clara felt the air collapse. Her ears rang, not from noise, but from the brutal clarity in Zeke's eyes. He looked at Luke, then at Hank, unmoving, unblinking, understanding. Luke hiccuped, confused. What? We all know it. Shut your damn mouth! Hank snapped, panic slicing through the words. But it was too late. Truth had crawled out, filthy, stumbling, but alive. Zeke's voice came low, so low Clara barely heard it. You shot Foreman. Not a question, a verdict. Hank's jaw clenched. He reached for me. No, Luke slurred with another laugh. He reached for his hat. You were the only fool reaching for a gun. Hank lunged at him. Too late. The others grabbed his arms, confusion turning the yard sour. Clara felt the pieces click. Zeke go into prison, protecting a younger brother Hank had manipulated. The fire that burned while Zeke was locked away. The quiet guilt behind his eyes. Hank didn't just wreck a life. He wrecked a family. Zeke stepped off the porch, each bootfall heavy, a man walking toward a wound finally named. Hank stumbled back. You stay away from me. Zeke kept walking. Clara saw it, the shift in him. A man who stopped caring whether he lived, so long as the truth burned with him. Zeke drew his gun. The metallic click echoed across the yard like a death note. Men stumbled back. Rifles wavered. Clara's breath shattered. Ruby whimpered behind her skirt. Zeke's voice was gravel. You killed my friend. I took the blame. You walked free. And while I rotted in a cell, my wife and child burned. Hank froze. Terror stripped him bare. Zeke wasn't aiming like a man threatening. He was aiming like a man ending something. Clara stepped off the porch before she realized she'd moved. Her legs trembled. Her ribs ached. But she walked. Zeke, she whispered. He didn't hear her. Time 600 melms. His arm was rigid, the steadiness of finality. She reached him, laid her hand on his forearm, felt the tension vibrating like a trapped storm. Zeke, she said again, voice breaking, if you shoot him, they'll hang you before dawn. He didn't blink. Clara's voice cracked deeper. And Ruby. Ruby will learn that justice is just revenge spelled different. Zeke flinched. Barely. But enough. His fingers trembled on the trigger. Clara slid both arms around his, not pulling the gun, just holding the man. Don't let him burn you twice, she whispered. Something broke. Zeke shut his eyes. His arm lowered, slow, agonizing, inch by inch. When the barrel pointed at the dirt, Clara felt him shake. Not with fear, but with grief finally too big to hide. Behind them, Hank staggered backward, breath ragged. But for the first time, he wasn't the most powerful man in the yard. He was just the smallest, and every man watching knew it. For a long breath, nobody moved. Zeke's gun hung there, caught halfway between death and mercy. His arm shook like a man holding up the weight of his whole past. Sweat rolled down his temple, slow, cold. Clara still clung to his forearm, her cheek brushing the coarse fabric of his sleeve, her heart beating hard enough for both of them. Hank swallowed, bravado draining straight through his boots. The two men with rifles lowered them inch by inch, like they suddenly realized they were standing too close to lightning. Zeke opened his eyes, and there was a hollowness there, a deep, carved-out space where rage had lived for years. Now that rage had a name, a face, a truth. He lifted his voice, low but sharp enough to cut the dark. "You shot Foreman," he said, "and I took the blame. I sat in a cell while my wife prayed over a leaky roof. I lost my family while you drank your nights away." Each word trembled with the effort not to pull the trigger. Luke Porter stumbled back, suddenly sober. The others stared at the dirt, unable to meet Zeke's gaze. Clara pressed closer, whispering, "Zeke, look at Ruby." He did. Ruby stood at the porch rail, small hands gripping the wood, eyes glassy with tears she was too proud to shed. A tremor ran through her body, the kind that came from watching the world decide who her uncle would become next. Zeke's breath broke. The gun sank. Slowly, painfully. Clara felt the moment the fight left his muscles, the collapse of a man who'd carried vengeance so long, it felt like part of his spine. He let the barrel point at the ground. Didn't holster it. Just let it hang there, lifeless in his hand. Then he turned to the only man with authority left. "Sheriff," Zeke said hoarsely, "you heard enough to act. Do your job." Sheriff Cal Pike had been standing half-hidden behind the drunk mob, jaw locked, sweat beading at his brow. Now every eye turned to him. "My job," he muttered. Zeke's voice steadied. "You want to prevent the next fire in this town? Start with the man who sparked the last one." Cal hesitated only a heartbeat. Then he stepped forward, pulled the rarely used cuffs from his belt, and snapped them onto Hank's wrists. Hank cursed, thrashed, spit, but Cal held firm. "Enough!" the sheriff barked. "You're going to the county jail, and if you twitch wrong, I'll drag you there by your ears." The yard exhaled as one, but Clara wasn't done. "Zeke," she whispered, "there's something I need to say, too." He turned, exhausted, eyes raw. Her hands shook as she lifted them. "The night you were taken to jail, my father was there." She swallowed. He didn't speak up. Didn't say he saw Hank hold the gun first. He stayed silent because he feared men like Hank. Her voice cracked. "And I've carried that silence like it's my own sin." Zeke stared at her as if seeing a scar she'd hidden under a lifetime of quiet. His reply came rough, but gentle beneath the gravel. "That ain't on you, Clara. A sin born from fear don't pass to the child. You hear me?" Her breath hitched, and for the first time since she'd met him, she believed someone might see her as more than debt and damage. Behind them, Ruby slid her hand into Clara's. The gun finally dropped to Zeke's side, empty of purpose. And the night, brutal as it was, ended without a body on the ground. Dust Hollow changed slow, the way dry ground takes water, hesitant, uneven, but real once it sinks in. Weeks passed after Hank's arrest. The town didn't say much out loud, but the silence had a different shape now, less sharp, less poisonous. Men who once spat near Zeke's boots now simply looked away. Women who only pitied Clara from afar now offered small nods, tight but respectful, as if unsure how to apologize without using words. Zeke felt the shift every time he drove the wagon into town. Folks still stared. That part wouldn't change. But the stares no longer carried smirks. Some held curiosity. Others held shame. A rare few held quiet gratitude. Dust Hollow had lived in Hank Bowers' shadow for years. With him gone, the air felt less heavy. Back at Black Rock Ranch, life settled into a rhythm that almost felt like the beginning of something new. One bright morning, Zeke hammered the final board into the rebuilt front gate. The wood was sturdy, smoother, but he kept one dark plank, the burned one, as the crossbeam. Said a gate should remember what stood before it. Clara stood beside him, hands dusty, hair tied back. She'd been helping since dawn, steady even when the hammering sent tremors through her still bruised wrist. Each strike seemed to echo inside her, knocking loose old fears grain by grain. Ruby knelt in the dirt with a pot of paint, tongue tucked in concentration, writing careful letters on the board Zeke carved. Carter and Dawson Homestead. The little girl read it aloud, proud. This says, all of us. Clara's breath quivered, not from pain, but from something gentler and frightening in its gentleness. Belonging. They mounted the board over the gate. Clara touched the carved letters, her fingertips brushing the wood as though testing whether the name was real. Later that afternoon, a knock hit the porch. Nora Whitcomb, the hard-edged widow from the North Pasture, stood there holding a basket of eggs. She thrust it forward awkwardly. "Trade for some of your hay," she said. A beat. And, "Good on you. Both of you. Ain't many stand up to a Bowers and keep standin'." Before Clara could answer, Nora marched off, muttering about supper. Time 900 pemes. Then came a Mexican family passing through for water. Their youngest daughter tugged Clara's skirt and whispered, "You're the lady who told that man no in front of everybody." Clara didn't know how to answer. Zeke did. He rested a warm, steady hand on Clara's back. "She's braver than this town deserved," he said simply. That night, as lantern light flickered across the kitchen walls, Clara caught Zeke watching the new gate through the window. His shoulders seemed looser, as if the weight he carried had shifted just enough to let him breathe deeper. "Feels strange," he murmured, "seeing our names up there." "Our names," Clara echoed, the words fragile but true. Ruby leaned against her. "Means we're a family," she said softly. "Uncle Zeke says families are folks who decide to stay." Clara felt something unlock in her chest, something she'd kept barred her whole life. Outside, the wind brushed the ranch grass in quiet sweeps. Inside, for the first time in years, none of them feared the night. The world hadn't fixed itself. Dust Hollow hadn't turned kind overnight. But the gate stood. The name stood. And so did they. The house had grown quieter in a different way. Not the fearful hush of waiting for trouble, but the gentle quiet of folks learning how to breathe again. Clara swept the kitchen in slow, even strokes, letting the rhythm settle her nerves. Her wrist still ached sometimes, stiff in the cool mornings, but the pain had softened into something she could live with, like an old bruise on the heart that no longer throbbed, just reminded. Ruby sat on the floor nearby, swinging a thin piece of twine between her fingers. The brass key hung from it, glinting faint in the lamplight. The same key Hank once dangled like a shackle. The same key Clara once pressed into her own skin to remind herself she wasn't free. "Clara," Ruby asked suddenly, "why don't you throw this thing away? It's ugly." Clara stopped sweeping. Memories stirred. Cold barns, locked sheds, whispered debts. A younger self learning that silence could be its own prison. She knelt beside Ruby and took the key gently from her hands. "Because," Clara whispered, "it reminds me I'm not going back to being owned again. I keep it so I don't forget how far I walked." Ruby nodded, brow scrunched, only half understanding. She reached to take the key back a little too fast, and it slipped from her fingers. The metal skittered across the floor and struck the wall with a sharp little ping. Clara winced, expecting damage. But instead, the key landed beside a jagged crack running down the plaster. A crack Hank made when he'd slammed the wall during one of his drunken threats. Clara hadn't looked at it since that day in town. She'd been avoiding anything that carried his shadow. Ruby crawled toward it, voice dropping to a whisper. "This was him, wasn't it?" Clara's throat tightened. She didn't want the girl to learn cruelty too fast. But lies never truly protected anyone. "Yes," she whispered. "He hit the wall when I didn't go with him." Ruby traced the crack with one careful finger. Should Uncle Zeke fix it? Footsteps sounded behind them. Zeke walked in with a bucket of feed, boots muddy, shoulders tired. He saw them crouched by the wall and frowned. "What's wrong?" Ruby pointed. "The wall's broken." Zeke crouched beside them. He ran a thumb along the crack, expression unreadable. Clara felt shame stir, old, unnecessary, but still alive somewhere deep. Finally, Zeke spoke. "Some things," he said quietly, "ain't meant to be patched over. A crack reminds us what we lived through. As long as it don't spread, it's honest." Clara looked at him, really looked. There was no judgment, only understanding born of too many scars. Ruby sat back on her heels. "So we keep it?" "We keep it," Zeke said. "We make better things around it." Clara let out a long breath, a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Later, she gathered old scraps of wood and carved small letters into them, slow, shaky, imperfect. She and Ruby glued them onto a little board. Carter and Dawson, the same name that hung above the gate. Ruby hammered the board onto the wall right beside the crack. "It looks nicer now," the girl declared. Clara rested her palm on the key around Ruby's neck, then on the wooden letters. Between the two, between the wound and the name, they had built a small truth. Scars didn't have to be hidden to be healed. Black Mesa Ranch didn't heal all at once. It healed the way an old horse learns to trust again. Slow steps, soft eyes, long silences. The first night after the showdown in Dust Chapel, Clara slept sitting up in the rocking chair. One hand cupped over her belly, the other curled around the ragged edge of Elias's old coat. She slept deeply, but not peacefully. Her breath shook in her throat, even in dreams. Elias didn't sleep at all. He sat on the porch until dawn, elbows on his knees, the gun he didn't fire lying across his boots. He didn't touch it. Didn't trust himself too, maybe. He just watched the sun crawl up the mountains, like the light needed permission to return after what happened. When Clara stepped outside, pale, tired, he rose too fast, like he'd been caught doing something wrong. "You didn't rest," she murmured. Elias shrugged. "Didn't feel right laying down after the night we had." Clara touched the porch rail, grounding herself. "You're allowed to rest, Elias." He swallowed hard and nodded, just once, though doubt still tightened his jaw. Inside, Clara found the silver concho where she'd set it the night before. In the gray morning light, it glinted weakly, a cold reminder of hands that once claimed her. She picked it up. It felt colder today, heavier. She opened the drawer where Elias kept the few precious things he had. His wife's folded kerchief, the tiny leather booties his son never wore, a letter with a name burned away by time. Clara placed the concho inside and closed the drawer like burying something that no longer needed a grave. Noah peeked around the corner. "You putting it away for good?" "For good," Clara said. He hesitated. "Can I try something with it later? Nothing bad. Just something new." Clara held his gaze, then smiled softly. "If it helps this house stay gentle, you can try anything you want." And for the first time since the canyon truth shattered her heart, Clara felt something warm lift inside her. Small, but steady. 1 year later, spring returned to New Mexico like a shy visitor. Slow steps, warm pockets of sunlight between cold breaths. Black Mesa Ranch looked different now. Not wealthier, not bigger, just lived in. Honest. A new wooden sign hung over the gate, carved by Noah with careful hands. Boone and Wynn cattle. Not fancy, not polished, but strong, like the people carrying the name. Ruth Wynn, barefoot, bright-eyed, a year old and stubborn as a mule, wobbled across the yard toward Elias, hands outstretched. Elias set down the fence post and crouched low. "Come on, darlin'. You're almost there." Ruth squealed and toppled straight into his arms. He caught her with a soft grunt, lifting her high until she cackled with triumph. He kissed her forehead, quick, shy, like he still wasn't sure he was allowed to love that loudly. Clara watched from the porch doorway, wiping flour from her hands. Warmth crept through her chest as she watched the man who once trembled under guilt now lift her daughter, like holding a blessing. Noah burst from the barn, older, taller, dust in his hair and pride in his steps. "Clara!" he shouted. "Look!" He pointed to the porch, the tiny metal wind chime, fashioned from the concho, danced in the breeze, ringing a thin, sweet note that drifted across the yard like a whisper of forgiveness. Clara stepped closer, hand rising to her mouth. The concho no longer looked cold or cruel or stained with Jeb Caro's shadow. Its edges softened, hammered flat. A small hole drilled through the top so a leather string could hold it. It didn't look like something she survived. It looked like something she made peace with. "You did this?" she whispered. Noah nodded proudly. "Harlan helped heat it. I did the rest." Elias walked up behind him, Ruth perched on his hip. "He worked on it in secret," he said, "wanted it to be a surprise." Clara traced the metal with one finger. The chime rang again, clearer, sharper, carrying hope in its tiny voice. "It sounds different," she whispered. "'Cause it means something different now," Noah said. "Means someone's home when it rings." Elias shifted Ruth on his hip, unsure. "You like it?" Clara looked at him, really looked. Warmth rising steady in her chest. "I love it," she said. Silence fell. A warm one this time, letting shoulders drop and breath deepen. Elias cleared his throat, eyes drifting toward the peaks. "Clara, I know names don't fix anything, but if one day you felt right taking mine—" "Elias." Clara stepped close enough her breath brushed his chest, close enough he tensed out of old habit before softening out of new trust. "It's not the name," she said. "It's where I choose to stand." Her hand found his. "And I'm standing here." Elias's eyes closed. One long, trembling moment. The concho chimed. Ruth laughed. Noah whooped as a calf bolted free. And Black Mesa felt, for the first time, not like a place outrunning ghosts, but a place building something worth staying for. Thank you for sharing this journey of courage, forgiveness, and second chances. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. And friends, especially those seasoned by life, tell me where you're watching from. Your stories keep this campfire burning. Black Mesa Ranch didn't heal all at once. It healed the way an old horse learns to trust again. Slow steps, soft eyes, long silences. The first night after the showdown in Dust Chapel, Clara slept sitting up in the rocking chair. One hand cupped over her belly, the other curled around the ragged edge of Elias's old coat. She slept deeply, but not peacefully. Her breath shook in her throat, even in dreams. Elias didn't sleep at all. He sat on the porch until dawn, elbows on his knees, the gun he didn't fire lying across his boots. He didn't touch it. Didn't trust himself to, maybe. He just watched the sun crawl up the mountains, like the light needed permission to return after what happened. When Clara stepped outside, pale, tired, he rose too fast, like he'd been caught doing something wrong. "You didn't rest," she murmured. Elias shrugged. "Didn't feel right laying down after the night we had." Clara touched the porch rail, grounding herself. "You're allowed to rest, Elias." He swallowed hard and nodded, just once, though doubt still tightened his jaw. Inside, Clara found the silver concho where she'd set it the night before. In the gray morning light, it glinted weakly, a cold reminder of hands that once claimed her. She picked it up. It felt colder today, heavier. She opened the drawer where Elias kept the few precious things he had. His wife's folded kerchief, the tiny leather booties his son never wore, a letter with a name burned away by time. Clara placed the concho inside and closed the drawer like burying something that no longer needed a grave. Noah peeked around the corner. "You putting it away for good?" "For good."